Okay, good morning everyone, and thank you for coming along today. This session is going to be live streamed, so also good morning and welcome to those people listening at home and at work. Before we start, can I just remind you all that you're free to tweet during the session as much as you wish, and also to download, if you've not already done, and have open the NAPF app, because we will have live voting during this. So this session today is looking at age at work, which is quite a broad topic, of course, covering issues such as rising longevity, healthy life expectancy, funding for social care, funding for retirement, the issue of flexible retirement now, and the employer's role in helping managing this ageing workforce. So my name's Laura Blows. I am editor of Pensions Age magazine, and I'll be chairing this session today. And I have joining me to discuss these issues Jagger, the Active Professor of Epidemiology of Ageing at Newcastle University, and Stephen Robson, Head of Pensions at United Utilities, and Kirsty Bartlett, Partner at Squire, Patton, Boggs. However, the aim of this, before our panellists speak, is to start a conversation about this very broad topic. We find it's very complex, there's lots of issues that interrelate with each other, and to try and get to grips with these issues, first of all, we really need to start a dialogue of what these problems are and how they interact. So first things first, we'll be quite curious to find out just how much of a conversation you've all already been having about the issues of an ageing workforce. So if you could please go there and open up your live apps, we'll have a first question for you. So the question is, which of the following best describes your approach to the challenge of an ageing workforce? Number one is, we have put a lot of thought into it and adjusted our benefit strategy to take into account of the fact that employees will be working longer. Number two, we have put some thought into it, but have not made any changes as of yet. And number three, it is not something that we have considered so far. So if you could all take a few moments, please, to go there and put down what you think best suits what your approach is at the moment. That would be great.
If it's all one, we'll just go to the exhibition stand.
Okay. Just give it a few more moments. I can see some of you are still doing that. Yeah. Okay, are we ready for the scores now? Let's go, if we can have a look, please. Yeah. So it seems to match what we're doing here today. We're aware that conversations need to be happening, but actions is the next stage there, which hopefully will be the next stage here for looking into things. Okay. So what we're going to do now is we'll have each of the panellists say a few words about these issues. And then if I can ask each of you to hold off any questions for each of the panellists until the end, I'll make sure there's plenty of time for questions. However, for the online audience, please feel free to submit questions online throughout the session, and I'll be able to read them out at the end when we do questions. So first up, please, could we have Carol say a few words?
Thanks. I'm very excited to be here back in my hometown of Manchester. So I'm going to just have you think about three issues around health of older people. I work on health of older people a lot, but three issues that are particularly concerning extending working life. So the first one is, how healthy are we going to be in our old age? The second one is to think about whether that patterning of health is the same across the whole of the country, and whether the regional inequalities are going to matter for extending working life. And last of all, the fastest growing section of the population is those aged 85 and over, whose numbers are going to more than double over the next 20 years. Why does that have an impact on extending working life? So first of all, how healthy are we going to be? Well, this graph shows you changes over the last 20 years, between 1991 and 2011, in life and cognitive impairment-free life expectancy. We often think that older workers are not up to it mentally, perhaps, that they're slower. This slide shows you in green the changes in life expectancy over the last 20 years. That's life expectancy at age 65. So men have gained about 4.5 years, women about 3.5 years in life, total life expectancy. But the blue bars show you the gain in years free of cognitive impairment. And so people aged 65 now are, in fact, particularly women, have a longer period free of cognitive impairment than they did 20 years ago. So that sort of goes against the grain. We think there's lots more dementia around. There's lots more dementia around because there are lots more older people, and age is the strongest risk factor. So in fact, in terms of cognitive impairment, it's better. Women have actually are now living fewer years with cognitive impairment than they were 20 years ago. However, the picture is not quite so bright when you look at disability. So the green bar's exactly the same, 4.5 years for men, 3.5 years for women in terms of gains in life expectancy. But women in particular, the pale blue line, have gained over 3 years with disability. So they live an extra 3 years with disability than they did 20 years ago, and men just under 2. So it's not quite as happy a picture when we look at in terms of disability, which is probably more physical functioning than mental functioning. Regional inequalities are huge. This graph shows you life expectancy along the bottom and healthy life expectancy at birth down the side. And if we put a line across at the state pension age 65, I know that's changing, but if we put a line across at 65, you can see that there's an awful lot of local authorities whose healthy life expectancy is below age 65. So at birth, people can expect to live less than 65 years healthy. If we see where those local authorities are, then the numbers at the side show you the percentage of local authorities by region whose healthy life expectancy is below 65. England as a whole, 73% of local authorities in England have a healthy life expectancy below age 65. But all the ones in the northeast do, 87% of those in the northwest, and 93% of those in Yorkshire and Humber. And so it's going to be much harder to work longer in those areas. It's going to be harder for employers, it's going to be harder for employees, because they're probably already going to have a health problem before age 65. And last of all, health of those aged 85 and over. We've done a unique study in Newcastle following a cohort of over 800 85-year-olds, and we followed them for 5 years. And this graph shows levels of dependency in that cohort, so that the dark blue, 8%, required 24-hour care. So typically they were very cognitively impaired, they required help getting to and from the toilet, this sort of thing. 12% required care daily at set times a day. So they might need help with medication, they might need help with a meal. 39% less than daily, typically required help shopping, and 41% were independent on this measure. So thinking about those with high dependency and medium dependency, for the high dependency ones, 3/4 of them were in care homes. But if they weren't in care homes, their main carer was a child. Similarly, for those of medium dependency, fewer were in care homes, and this time the split was between a spouse and a child. And remember, a spouse is probably much the same age, and sometimes with older couples, very old couples, it's hard to differentiate who's being cared for and who's the carer sometimes. Thinking about these children, how old are these children? Well, if you look at age at first birth, historically, for people aged 85 and the cohorts who will be coming through aged 85, age at first birth changed hardly at all. And typically, the age of the child, when the parent's 85, is around 60 years old. Lots of these are in employment, around 10% in full-time employment, 10% of full-time employers care, and around 15% of part-time employers. Lots age 50 to 64, and you can see from both of those graphs, women are the people who are predominantly doing the caring role. And if you care more than 50 hours a week and are in full-time employment, you are over about 2.5 times more likely to report poor health. So these are the people, particularly the women, who were asking to work longer, and they are also, a lot of them, caring for an elderly parent, and may also be caring for grandchildren as well. So these are the issues that are going to affect employers and employees in terms of working longer. Thank you.
Carol? And next up we have Stephen now talking about the employer's viewpoint with this.
Morning. Before I start, just United Utilities, who we are, because it is a utility company, but effectively it's North West Water, so we're a water utility. So that will play into some of the things I'm going to say because of the type of workforce we have. I want to just split this into what this means for the employee and what this means for the employer, because I think the issues are different. I think the freedom and flexibility that's come in from April this year is generally good news for an employee. And there are a number of things as you start to think about being able to work longer, the way legislation works to allow you to. So if I go through the employees first, and then what does that mean for the employer? Because I think it's more of a mixed position. We have now flexible retirement. People say, well, we used to have it before, but we didn't really, because if you were in a defined benefit scheme, you either took it or you didn't. So whether you worked fewer hours or not was not really linked to your income you were receiving, because you couldn't split it. Defined contributions, you could do flexibility if you had a large enough pot, and most people didn't in defined contribution. So again, we never really had flexibility of ability to change working hours and start to draw some of the pension to align and have a gradual process. So that's now in. And I think it's the first time. So that, I think, over the next few years will become increasingly used, increasingly popular, as people start to realise they can actually change and flex their hours and their income at the same time. As Carol was just saying, the carer position, if you do have a carer, you're still working in your 60s, you may well want, if you are a carer and you're working in your 60s, you may well want to flex your hours. Now you can actually interlink that to the pensions now, so there is an ability to do so. And then the other one, which is pertinent for myself, because we did use this, is the grandchild minder, where my parents actually acted as a child minder for us. So I think that is another increasing situation where that you when you get to a certain point, you'll get pushed at both ends, and you may be occurring, you may have grandchildren, and it's the balance of how you fit work with the other things. Changing roles is one to actually think about, in that the day of working until a certain point, stopping and then never working again, I think that is on its way out. It's increasingly likely. Do you think the pensions industry, how many more professional trustees do we have who were effectively people who've stopped doing day-to-day corporate pensions work and are now a professional trustee and probably work less than full-time? And I think if you look across most industries, that will increasingly become the case. Affordability is an issue. Defined benefits are going. So while a lot of people retiring today will have some element of defined benefit, they certainly are unlikely to have the full career in a defined benefit scheme. Go 5, 10, 15 years out, and that is increasingly unlikely, if not, is probably not going to be the case. So how can you afford to retire? If you don't have the income, do you change your role, do a different type of job, or do you look to work longer? And then the last one is the ability to carry on working. United Utilities, we have a lot of manual-based workforce, people who are out digging roads up, repairing leaks. Can they really be doing that for 40, 45 years? We're in the northwest. So again, if you go back to Carol's slides, 87% of local councils are saying the healthy lifestyle is below 65. So can they really carry on doing that job? If they don't have decent pension arrangements, they struggle to do their job, you're getting into some complex issues for the employer there. But we do have a section of people in United Utilities who really never want to retire. The rangers, and it's nothing to do with football. It's these are our forest rangers. We have reservoirs, we have land, we have catchment management. So these people spend all day out and about, quite often with their dogs, doing the land management, looking after the wildlife. So when we go to talk to them about pensions, we do a session, and one of my colleagues actually went to speak to them a couple of weeks ago. You talk to them about retirement, and they say, well, what am I going to do in retirement? Will I just go for a walk around a reservoir, for example? I said, well, I get paid for doing that now. So these people are definitely in the camp of, do I really want to retire? They may want to flexibly do it, that they will work fewer hours, but the actual giving up a job, that's as much a vocation for them. So you spin that across the page to the company. So what does that mean? And the first thing I'll say is that the way defined contributions are now, they're a savings plan and they're a long-term savings plan. They're not a pension plan anymore. So when somebody gets to 55, they have a pot of money, and cash is always very amenable to people. And will they start to take some of that income? Will they start to draw that down? Will they start to use that whilst they still work? So is it a longer, is it sort of a sort of later in working life savings plan, or is it a retirement plan? And going back to the other side from the employee, if they don't have enough in their funds to actually have a sustainable retirement, but they're starting to take it early, that just creates the position of they will want to carry on working longer and longer. Can they do that? Are they able to do that? Is that what works for the company? How does that impact your skills retention, which might be positive? Because as a lot of companies, we privatised in the late 80s. During the 90s, we effectively stopped a lot of the recruitment, and in the 80s they had the YTS type of schemes. They all effectively stopped. Apprenticeships tended to stop. So you have a lot of people in the 50s, and you have a gap then until people, when apprentices started maybe about 10 years ago. So we have a skills position that does that balance with people stopping work, and have we got the right people to actually come back in? So you have a skills, but you also have a talent and recruitment. Is somebody going to come into a role to do a ranger's job when you think, well, the guys who are doing it now are never going to leave? So why would I go into sort of that and wait forever for a promotion, wait forever to go into the role? So the actual workforce planning, the management is increasingly difficult because you don't know when people are going to retire, you don't know how they're going to retire, and you don't know whether they're going to want to actually start to change the roles they do. Legislation impacts on that. We can no longer say to somebody, you're 65, thank you very much, here's your pension, off you go. That's just not possible anymore. So you may not want to do it, but if you did, you couldn't. And then linked to that is the capability issue. So you've got age discrimination, you've got no fixed retirement age, and you've got, as I said, people out who may not be able to physically do their job at the level required now. So if they don't have decent retirement incomes, they can't afford to retire, they might not want to retire, but they can't do their role anymore. So it suddenly becomes a very difficult situation for somebody who may have worked, as many of our employees work for us for 30 to 40 years, to actually start to capability manage them out of the business. That's not really an area you ever want to get into. So looking at what I was saying before, you have some other considerations. Health, how do people feel about working full time? Are they still able to carry on doing it? The state pension, where's that going? It's increasing. If that's a large part of retirement income, does that actually mean work-wise people will want to carry on working longer? Inheritances, I think that will increasingly play a part in retirement planning. The other one I haven't got on there is houses. So if people haven't got the income, but they do need to actually change their role, or they want to actually stop working in full, inheritances or house purchase will form part of the whole retirement planning. How long do people want to have in retirement? We were talking before the session started about the state pension and the 7 years. That's how long it was intended to be about on average. Now, nobody's saying that's the right answer, but is 30 years or 35 years the right answer for retirement? Do people want to do that, especially when you link into the healthy position, the healthy lifestyle, and how do you fund that? What do you do in it? And then from the employee point of view, you do have increasing technology. So does that mean the manual-based labour force we have, it's not as hard for them anymore because you've got technology, you've got other things that can do a lot of those roles? They no longer get the call at 1 o'clock in the morning to go and repair a leak because actually something on the system has said this actual pipe is close to bursting. So actually that can be done during the normal working day before it breaks. So from a company point of view, I've actually been involved this year in we have an occupational capability review every year, which looks at who do we have in the business, who do we need in the business, and how do we fill the gaps? What's the risks of key skills, key people, and how do we balance that? Pensions used to just sit to one side of that. We dealt with people who retired and looked after the pension scheme. Suddenly, I'm sort of part of that, along with the recruitment team, along with our policy people about flexible working, because you don't know when people are retiring. You don't know when you need to bring people in to train them up to the right time. So if we bring in 100 apprentices, expecting we will need them in 5 years' time, but people don't retire for 15 years, you've actually got a double workforce there because you've got people who are ready to do that job, you're paying them, you've got people who have decided they don't wish to retire yet, and it's getting that balance. It's increasingly difficult for companies. So it is now a policy join-up between your talent policies, your flexible working, your recruitment policies, and your pension stroke retirement policy. Do you want to provide people with enough income so that they can retire and help things work through? If you don't have a policy about what they can do and when they can take their money, everybody may start to spend their money at 55 and then get to 60 plus and not have enough to retire and to carry on working. You do have things like, I'll mention the easy one for me first, the pension tax consultation. That will impact on what we offer. And at the other side of it, you've got the apprentice levy. So the companies will start to pay a fixed percentage to a levy, which the government will use to pay apprentices. Does that encourage you to take on more? And why, if you haven't got the rules for them down the line, how does that actually all join up? The last one is something on the financial education that we've increasingly started to look at a whole of working life retirement journey. So what do people need to do at different stages? But you do have mortgage versus pension arguments. People probably can't save for both when they're in the 30s. So is it wrong to save for a mortgage? Do they join the pension scheme because you get the free money? Should the pension scheme be something different, which allows, you can say, well, you can pay this much into a savings plan, this much into pension, and have that balance? I think you'll notice I've given no answers at all. I've just raised lots of issues. And I think we're in the camp of, we realise this is a serious issue, and it actually is far bigger than just pensions anymore. It's one that you really as a company, to look at what you need, when you need it, and then link the pension policy into everything else. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. And next up we have Kirsty looking at the legal issues.
Good morning, everyone. When we did the planning for this session, I was given the role of doom and gloom. We've had a bit of that already so far, so I'm going to try not to bring it down yet further. I wanted to develop a little bit some of the challenges that Carol has certainly outlined, and then the response that we've seen one employer at least already looking at in their considerations, and really try not repeat everything that Steve has just said, but pick out some of the legal considerations that employers need to be thinking about when they're addressing these issues. To me, although we started talking about the challenges of an ageing workforce, I almost want to delete ageing and encourage employers to think about their workforce more as individuals. And age is absolutely a part of that and is going to become a bigger part of that as the population ages and the working population ages. But from a legal perspective, you'll see it's a lot easier if you try not to think about age too hard and have other reasons for what you're doing and why. We learned yesterday about how important the employer is in this massive savings challenge that we face as a society. Develop that and look at some of the ways that employers can help there. And then this is the NAPF, so we will finish on pensions. I'm going to not really talk an enormous amount about this slide because I think Steve has already done so much more practically and eloquently, and it's always better to hear from people at the coalface than advisors such as myself. But the reality is that over 30% of the workforce is already 50 and above, and because of recruitment issues and things in the recession before the last one, that talent pool is not coming up in exactly the same level as it was previously. So it's a challenge for employers. It's also an opportunity. How are they going to look at the skills that they have within their workforce, make sure that they've got the right people doing the right job and supporting them? From a legal perspective, people have the right to request flexible working. We've already heard from Carol that that is something that children with an 85-year-old parent and possibly grandchildren coming up as well are maybe more and more likely to want. In my business, we see actually a huge amount of increase in working flexibility across the board. So age is absolutely a part of this, but I think it's also just a way that in this century and beyond, people are going to expect and want in much more anyway. Health, I was very interested by the last point that Carol made about the preponderance of ill health amongst people who are themselves caring and working full-time. Well, as a lawyer, there's something called the Disability Discrimination Act. You do actually have to make appropriate adjustments and help and support your employees if they are facing ill health. So that's maybe something that we will see come to the fore a little bit more as all of this plays through. The key, though, here, as I said, is avoiding discrimination on grounds of age. And from an employer perspective, I'm going to say it fast because it makes it sound really easy. That means don't do it because of somebody's age. right? Sounds really easy. You know, I'm not going to provide answers. I'm just going to tell you what you have to do to be compliant. It is a challenge. I think encouraging employers to look at their workforce as individuals, look at all of the different responsibilities that they will have, try and encourage and support them to have the careers that they would like to have, has got to be the way that keeps you out of the tribunals as much as possible. Conscious we want to allow time for questions, Laura. So, I'm a lawyer, I do words, so this is the result of a little bit of time panicking on Google, doing some searches to find some numbers. So anyone, actuaries in the room, I apologise profusely, but even that, I thought, just makes it quite stark. Aviva, so an insurance company, did some research amongst their customers. These are people who have been saving for pensions, they're 45 and above. The £53,000 number was bigger than I was expecting it to be. You know, hopefully it will continue to grow, but it still leaves people with quite a significant gap in terms of their expectation. They said that that would buy an annuity of just over £3,500. Their customers said, well, we think we're going to need £12,500 to provide us with an adequate retirement income, even after the state pension, between now and then after April next year. There's still 2,000, bit less after April next year, gap just in that expectation, which has got to be funded. So the challenge is huge. Auto-enrolment is helping. Participation rates are going up, but surprise, surprise, that money's being spread more thinly across a larger number of people. So at the moment, the contribution rates are going down, if you look at them on average. That's the challenge. That's slightly doom and gloom. At the risk of bringing us down further, can I talk about long-term social care for a minute? That's the elephant in the room in any of these conversations. Saving for a retirement income is bad enough. If you end up being within the 25% of men or 30% of women who will actually end up in a care home for more than 2 years, that income expectation is not going to do it. So the challenges of how we deal with that, how we educate people to prepare themselves and equip themselves for that, I haven't got any answers for, so I'm going to move on and talk about the employer role in all of this. I was really interested in the NAPF research in the plenary session yesterday, and the guy with the post-its and his very, very checkered, much more interesting career history than mine. I was just, you know, huge range of jobs. But it was clear from that he was saving for a pension when he was in employment. People trust their employers an awful lot more than financial services industry or what have you. So employers have got an absolutely critical role to play in here, and they can, I hope, do both, but it comes into paying contributions, putting their hands in their pockets, having a benefits package that is right for their workforce, attracts and retains the right people, balances from a business perspective the cost and the risks. You know, we've seen companies be quite badly burnt in terms of put in place a final salary pension scheme, and the regulatory regime and environment changes and changes, and suddenly it becomes a lot more expensive, and there's a lot more obligations there than they'd perhaps expected, and if they'd known that up front, would they have done it? Look at healthcare liabilities of companies in the States for pensioners, for example. You know, there's all sorts of risks out there that I can't see many employers wishing to knowingly take on, but at the same time, they'll want to keep good people. Where I think we're seeing some really interesting developments, and Steve has already mentioned some of them, is around the facilitating savings role. So with auto-enrolment, employers have to at least provide their employees with a pension. How many are looking into workplace ISAs, help with career development loans, you know, all sorts of other things that they may wish to do to help support their employees. I was really pleased talking earlier, talking to Steve about the financial education that United Utilities are putting in place, and you know, that's a big part. From an employer perspective, if I was put, well, I am an employer technically, and you know, we certainly provide pensions for our staff, and if my hand goes in my pocket and I put money into my employees' pension pots, I want to make sure they do the right thing with that, frankly, and part of that is education, part of that is making sure that they have the advice that they need. From an employer perspective, don't do the latter directly unless you are FSA authorised. Please find someone, pay them, do your due diligence on them to make sure you've picked the right firm and that they will support your employees adequately. yesterday, the lady on the interview who was saying that it had cost her £600 in financial advice to access a £5,000 pot. Well, as an employer at the moment, you're allowed to give your employees up to £150 a year of financial advice. I hope that's something that will increase because there's obviously a need for it and something that employees will appreciate and welcome. Pensions. A bit to cheer us up with, I hope, at the end. Pensions are still a massively important part of all of this. ONS report in 2013, 47% of the country's total wealth is tied up in pensions. So it's not as big as we need it to be, but it's pretty significant. And auto-enrolment will mean that everybody is going to have something, and we have to try and help them to do that in the most intelligent way. It's been a very tax-efficient and beneficial regime. Shall we just leave it there and hope that that will continue and watch with extreme interest the consultation and where we go with that? We will grapple with it, and I'm sure it will be talked about even more at next year's conference. Steve was talking about the increased flexibility from freedom and choice. From an employee perspective, provided you've got a big enough pot of money, the world is out there, and there are some it can help to enable you to put some money aside to pay for those care home fees and what have you. So it is a very positive thing. There are dangers associated with it. We have to make sure the pots are big enough first and then help and support employees in order to use it wisely. Those are my conclusions, but I'm not going to talk about them at all because I know Laura's hoping you will all ask us lots and lots of questions. I'm delighted at that prospect as well, obviously, but thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Kirsty. And as you mentioned, we've got a fair few minutes there for questions, if anybody has anything they'd like to ask. Yes, certainly.
It's Alistair McQueen from Aviva.
Oh, I hope I got the numbers right then.
Thanks to Carol also for those figures about healthy life expectancy. That was really insightful. But Stephen, from your perspective, I'm interested to know at roughly what age do your employees knock on your door and start to ask about retirement? And are their expectations different to what you then tell them about their potential longer working life? They come in with an expectation of stopping at the age of 60 and then they walk out there thinking it's not going to be as simple as that.
It's an interesting one. We have a lot of long-serving employees who have been in defined benefit for pretty much most of their working life. So the average age people retire in UU is about 61, and most for them is actually relatively a large pension, so they do okay. But yeah, we actually, I'd say, start talking to them before they start talking to us now, where we actually start talking to them actually from day one, but we have a plan from 50 onwards to a gradual increase in talking about retirement, what it might mean, and increasingly the DC space, what they need to be doing and thinking about, because we're making decisions for them on lifestyle issues and investment issues and when they're going to retire. I would say most people hope to be able to retire from certainly not much beyond 60. In reality, the people that getting to that in the next few years probably can. People in 10, 15 years will have to start probably saving more to do so.
Okay, thank you. And is there any other questions? Yes, lady there. Yes.
Hello, it's Angelica Finnegan from Charity Finance Group. One of the things that during the party conferences when I was going to pensions events, I wanted to try and get people to answer questions on how we help small employers kind of tackle these issues, because I think you hit the nail on the head when you said people trust their employers. If you've got small organisations, which for the voluntary sector, that's where most people are employed, you know, with under 25 employees and you don't have a financial director, I'm just wondering how we get the message out to them, what kind of support is available to them. I just wondered if you can reflect on some of those things, if possible.
Yeah, certainly.
I suggest picking that up. I've actually helped 2 small charities set up their auto-enrolment arrangement. So I've effectively gone in and talked to them, helped the company set their plan up, and then talked to the individuals about it. And I think you're right, it's a major issue that they don't know anything about pensions whatsoever. They've never had one, they've never thought about it, and most of their employees have never had one. So it's been quite an interesting difference between working for a large company with ability to talk, we have big arrangements and ability to actually provide things. So I think it's difficult. There have been quoted certain size fees to actually set up the arrangement, which are way beyond their means. So Nest have done a great job in, there's lots of stuff on the website, there's lots of letters they can do and information. So the employer has things they can use, but to get external help, unless you know somebody, like as I say, one happened to know me, and then the other said, can you do it for me as well? So you end up doing it again. But I think it's very difficult because they won't have the money to pay the fees needed. So it's a way of finding information via the internet and then using that to try to help their employees.
And doom and gloom again here. Sorry, but doing it in a way that is helpful and guidance and informative rather than advice. But actually, I'm assuming we're talking DC because charities in a DB environment have got all sorts of other challenges that we'd need another 50 minutes to talk about. The relatively simple message that says, whatever you can afford, squeeze a bit more out and put it in, has got to be the right message. Because that's the main challenge that I think we face now with auto-enrolment is you've got to get it, you've got to get your 3%, even 8% is not going to be enough. And that, I hope, is a relatively simple message for any employer to pass on.
It's been easy getting the individuals to join because you just use the, well, for every £1 you pay, you'll get at least £1 back in day one. You'll get another £1 put in free. You can't get that deal anywhere else, so why would you not? But to actually what it means for helping them retire, I think that's an enormous different hurdle. So the 2 I've dealt with, we've dealt with the getting them to join and make them see the logic of joining, and that's reasonably easy, and there's free money on the table, so why not pay enough to get that?
Okay. Kirsty, I'd be quite interested to hear your view as well in terms of, do you feel that there needs to be perhaps a bit of a blurring between the advice and guidance because of employees falling through the gap in between them, and from an employer viewpoint as well, of course?
I think there are a lot of employers out there who would really like to be more helpful and do more and say more, and they are concerned that they would face potential liability if they do that. And I think that's a shame, and something more concrete in terms of guidance for employers, if you like, and reassurance that they're not going to face complaints for the particular product that they chose that didn't end up being the market leader, for example. I think that would be incredibly helpful. Whether we see it, we'll see.
I take it you agree there, Stephen?
Yeah, I do. I have a bit of a bugbear about people hiding behind, I can't advise you because I'm not regulated. Because most people, if you give them the information and you explain the situation to them, they can make the decision, they understand it enough. As I say, if you say, well, if you join and you pay £1 and the company will pay £1, and if you don't join, that £1 you put into yourself, you get £1, or, why would you not join? Now, that's not advice, that's just factual information.
Yeah.
So it does annoy me a bit that the people do hide behind the fact they can't advise, and that means they don't try to inform.
Okay, thank you. And is there any other questions? Yes, lady.
I think I'm a much smaller company than yourself, but seeing a wave of very well-funded DB people go out. I wondered what pressure you're seeing now from the DC scheme, where we don't have things like critical illness cover built into ill health early retirement. So what action are you seeing or requests are you seeing?
When we set our DC arrangement up, we did put group income protection aligned to it. So for people who are unable to work for a period, they do start to keep an income and pension contributions go in. Critical illness is an interesting one in that we don't have a critical illness policy. So if somebody wants to be off for a period, you have sick pay, but the grouping protection doesn't really kick in, and there is a gap there. And I would say as an employer, we tend to try to manage that with pay. So you may have sick pay policy, but you will look at it favourably in certain situations if you know that the individual, it's another 6 months or whatever, you may extend. So we tend to deal with it that way. We have flexible options for individuals that they can buy themselves via flexible benefit package, but I'll be honest, they're not well taken up, and pricing, I couldn't tell you whether it's competitive. But I don't think it's difficult, because you say the DB did more than just provide the pension. It did that, well, anything happens to you, you're safe there as well. And I think it is, there is that balance, and life cover is another one that keep the actual, it doesn't cost a lot for life cover, but it's worth so much for the situations where it happens.
Thank you for that. I just have this feeling in my waters that the first person in our DC scheme is going to have 12 children or something. It's awful. We need to be thinking about it.
Okay.
Yeah. Life cover is one in situation, but the cost of life cover, you could have, instead of having 2 or 4 times, you could have 8 times. The cost is not that much more, but that would make an enormous difference. So it actually allows that flexibility.
We see a number of employers, when they're looking at closing a final salary scheme to future accrual, massively increasing the level of life coverage that they quite often
Life cover
look at.
actually doesn't worry me because it's actually quite low cost.
Mm.
It's the in-between, somebody's going to get very ill and not going to get better with their 12 children.
And
That's
that's
how
the
life
income
works.
protection issue, which is why we put that in place.
Okay, thank you. I have a comment here, actually, I'd like to put to Carol from the live web streaming. It's about the healthy life expectancy and the differences between the regions, and to do with the different types of work as well. Basically, just asking in terms of, do you feel there should be perhaps differences in state pensions age? How would you split that, for instance, between regions or types of work? Is it feasible at all?
Yeah, the Pensions Commission did think about that when they were debating back in 2005 about extending working life, and we had a discussion about them linking state pension age to healthy life expectancy. But the measure is not really able to do that at the moment. It's not robust enough, they felt, to be able to do that. I think from the conversations we've just been having, the best thing to do really is to for employers to be more flexible, but also to encourage their workforce to start thinking about and planning for what they want to do and in the future. And that includes, I would say, lifestyle changes, because retirement is a good opportunity because you're entering a phase of change to take on health messages. So to engage, as I think United Utilities are, with your workforce and get them to think about, well, what do they want to do when they retire? Oh, well, they want to play with grandchildren. Oh, well, you know, maybe you need to get a bit fitter. And so I think that would certainly help in terms of the transition to retirement, but also in keeping the workforce healthier too.
Okay, thank you. I think we've got time just for one more quick question, if anybody has a question to ask. Ceci.
Sorry, Terry Moriarty from the Irish Association of Pension Funds. Probably a question for Steve. Do you think in an increasing DC world, employers are really going to have to look at the contributions they're making to try and ensure their staff can afford to retire?
Do you think they will have to? No. Do I think they will? I think it will be a mixed position, depending on companies' views about how big an issue they have with an ageing workforce. If they believe that's a concern and an issue, there's a business reason to do so. If they believe they have a relatively young transient workforce who won't be with them when they get to the age where there's a problem, maybe not. Maybe looking at savings plans like corporate ISAs actually will suit their workforce better than a pension arrangement. So I think it's mixed. United Utilities, yes, we do, and we know that because we have people who come in and work for us for a lot of their career. So we're very concerned about the time where they can't do their role, but then they can't afford to retire either. And that actually is a big issue for us because you don't want to treat people who are giving you 30 plus years service in a way where you feel you're actually exiting them and managing them out of the business in a sort of an unloyal way.
Okay, thank you. I know there's probably many, many more questions we can ask with this, but the aim of this session was to at least start the conversation about how we can try to address these issues. So on that note, we do have another question to ask you, just to see what kind of impact having these conversations does have. So if you don't mind,
what you're supposed to put, yeah?
We just want to see whether we've failed or not.
so yes, we just take a
But
few
don't let that
moments
lead
to
you.
Okay, do we seem about ready? Do we have the answers, please? Oh, yeah, that's a relief, I think, all round. So 70% have gone out and been considering these issues more, 30% the same. Okay, thank you very much for attending today, and for those listening online, thank you also. And we've got refreshments coming up next, but in the meantime, please could you join me in giving your thanks to Carol, Stephen and Kirsty.